I have this theory that the reason why socialism hasn't been working too well in the 20, was basically a disaster in the 20th century, and Karl Marx's predictions didn't come true. Um, well, basically because I think Bernstein had some valid points, and Marx didn't wasn't paying attention and didn't live long enough to see the fact that it was possible for capitalism to be reformed, and that universal suffrage would make a lot of the violence he advocated totally unnecessary. And also, I think also a lot of Karl Marx's predictions weren't wrong. People just interpreted them very, very wrong. I think Lenin, well, yeah, Lenin did the whole vanguard thing and imperialism. He just added his own stuff. He just wanted power. I think Lenin was the first fascist. He created fascism because fascism was definitely a reaction to what Soviet communism or capital, whatever you want to call that system that the Soviets created. They called it communism. The Americans called it communism, and it was a terrible system. It really was. It didn't. They did have some achievements, but they were at terrible, terrible costs. Just terrible costs. Lenin, one of the things Lenin did do right was the NEP. He believed, and which was consistent with Marxist thought, that socialism was going to properly occur for it to work in an advanced capitalist nation and not in some primitive backwater, one of the most primitive places you can imagine, and that it really wasn't, that Russia wasn't developed enough to implement socialism. And then Stalin, I think Stalin wasn't an idiot, but he wasn't very well educated, and he was basically a thug. Although I guess he did do well in school, but Stalin was not a subtle man. He was very impulsive, I think. And I think people like power. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. The Kuomintang wasn't always right wing in China. The Soviets went to help the Chinese, and they told the Kuomintang, I says, China is just so backwards. There's just no way you can switch to socialism. You haven't even really entered the capitalist phase, which is ironic because that's exactly what the Kuomintang did. It was basically what Deng did and what Singapore did, which was create this sort of state-directed form of capitalism to develop an extremely primitive economy, and what China's been doing since basically the 80s or the 90s. I think the problem is that if it ever works, and I'm not saying it is, but my observation is it could, that like Leonardo da Vinci and his helicopter, or Simon de Montfort and his democratic parliament, which included the common representatives who were illiterate, and the first thing they did was deport all the Jews. Which I'm gonna take the conservative point here and mention that they had a point, that people that say that pure democracy is basically mob rule have a point when they point out the dangers of letting, what did, not Friedrich Nietzsche, but I can't remember his name. He was an American, and basically he said democracy is the notion that the common man knows what he wants and deserves to get it, good and hard. You can look that up. The name escapes me, and he's very, very famous for being kind of. He didn't like the Nazis, but he had nothing but contempt for the principles of democracy. I guess he is more basically a sort of an aristocratic technocrat. He didn't think that old aristocrats could, and I kind of see that point too. That especially like during this epidemic, that maybe we should just let smart people tell everyone what to do, because the average person left to their own designs. Well, look at them. They didn't want to wear a mask. They put trucks on the Canadian border. They act like ignorant, uneducated peasants, because education is the key, and we're not going to have any of these things until everybody is equally educated and enlightened, and that may never happen. But we are, like Simon de Montfort's Parliament was in the 12 or the 1300s, and it wasn't till the late 1800s, early 1900s when democracy became viable outside of its womb. I mean, we tried it. The French Revolution was a disaster initially, but it kind of, and Napoleon was kind of a throwback. But these things kick-started the society that we have now, which is, I mean, for all its faults, capitalism, development, life expectancy, the average person having indoor plumbing and heating in every room. What do they call that? Central heating, a car, a dog, college education. We've made so much progress. Democracy, what is an amazing system mixed with regulated capitalism. Now, does that mean that it's always going to be the ultimate system? I mean, I'm sure feudalism and back in Roman times, slavery seemed to be, the bee's knees. That was the most advanced. Hegel in the 19th century thought that constitutional monarchy, or basically an absolute monarchy, was the highest development of any society, and that society would never change. And yet things keep changing. Things do keep changing. Maybe not in the way that they're predicted, but maybe Karl Marx was off, not by decades or even centuries. Maybe his predictions were off by maybe even 1,000 years. How long were people hunter-gatherers? Tens of thousands of years? And then we moved on to big societies based on slavery. How long did that last? Maybe not tens of thousands of years, but thousands of years. And then feudalism. I mean, feudalism is different than slave societies. But that lasted 500, 600, 700 years. And capitalism, as we know it, modern capitalism, which started in the Netherlands, and industrial capitalism, which started in Great Britain, hasn't quite been around. Well, modern capitalism under the Dutch Golden Age was the 1600s. So that may be 300 years. And industrial capitalism, maybe 200 years now. Maybe we're expecting things to change too fast. And that social democracy is all we should really expect now. And that this whole socialism thing, societies may evolve into something we don't even recognize, like Star Trek communism or post-scarcity economies where we got the robots making so much stuff for us till they get smart and kill us all. And the cockroaches take over. Fully automated cockroaches, fully automated gay cockroaches with robots. Luxury space communism. I don't know. We'll see. But I just want the thoughts of everybody here, capitalists and socialists. Do you agree that it was just too soon? That these these horrible, disastrous attempts at communism and socialism that occurred in the 20th century were kind of like the French Revolution's attempt to create a democratic state, which was also a bloody disaster. Not because the premise was invalid, or Simon de Montfort's Parliament. Not because these ideas are bad, because they seem to be inevitable, but because brilliant people came up with this idea and said, hey, like Da Vinci and his helicopter, how long did it take us to make a working flying machine? How many people had to jump off cliffs before that worked? I don't know. Maybe it's just a bad idea and it's just pie in the sky and it's impossible and it'll never work. Or maybe people 500 years from now will be laughing that we thought that we could create a utopia with our primitive brains and our primitive technology. What do you think? I don't even know if I can post this, but we'll see what happens.